of PRMA Market Access here at Indegene, and I'm pleased to welcome Scott Howell today for his session regarding the impact of structural and market changes in the U.S. life science market. Scott retired as the Chief Strategy Officer for U.S. Pharmaceuticals at Novartis, where he led the U.S. commercial model transformation, including implications for drug development and portfolio management, as well as U.S. business development and licensing and pricing and access, and a pricing and access innovation team. Prior to joining Novartis, Scott was the Vice President of Market Access at Jazz Pharmaceuticals. Earlier in his career, he was at Cardinal Health as a Senior Vice President of Manufacturer and Clinical Services for specialty pharmaceuticals. Very excited to hear his thoughts on the impact of the structural and market changes in the U.S. and the life science market today, especially in light of the recent passage of the Inflation Reduction Act with its potential implications for our industry. Welcome, Scott. Glad to have you here.
Thanks, Jack. It's great to be with you today. And why don't we just get right to it and bring up the slides? As Jack mentioned, I'm very pleased to be with you today to discuss what I consider really a new era for biopharma in the U.S. And this is due to the structural and market changes that have been occurring here over the last 6 or 8 years. We're all very familiar, I think, with the notion that the market has changed quite a bit, but all too often we don't take a moment to step back and reflect on what's going on and why, and moreover, what the implications are for us. The implications, in fact, are quite substantial, and taken together, they make a very strong case for adaptation and change for our industry. Let's take a look at the first slide. Okay, the first key theme that we're all familiar with here in the U.S. is increasing U.S. drug list prices. Again, though, oftentimes it's useful to put these things in context to understand why they're happening. And there are several key drivers, obviously, for the increased list prices in the U.S. The first, and probably, I believe, the most important one, is just genericization. If we go back in time to the 1990s, the industry structurally was in a very different place. The vast majority of prescriptions being filled were filled with branded agents, and these agents generally targeted primary care conditions with very large patient populations, often tens of millions of Americans taking the medicines. So lots of patients, and therefore prices on a per unit basis could be quite low. Over time, those medicines have now mostly genericized, and we find ourselves at a time when 90% of prescriptions filled in the U.S. now are filled with generics, and only 10% are branded agents, and therefore generating revenue for the innovative industry. So the industry has become highly concentrated in terms of where it receives its revenues. And moreover, within the 10% that are branded, an increasing fraction of proponent of that is shifting to small population conditions like hematology and oncology, autoimmune, and other specialty conditions. And so we now have a situation in the U.S. where 3 to 4% of Americans with specialty conditions are driving half or more than half of all branded spending. And so we have a hyper concentration, really, of revenues for the industry on a very small number of patients. So we have small patients, and now, of course, then structurally, you have to have much higher list prices and net prices as well to make that work as a business. There are other drivers as well. One that's often reflected is that governments outside the U.S. pay significantly less for drugs. We all know that's true. Generally, those countries are using price controls to manage a version of price controls to manage the prices that they pay, and so they pay lower prices. The industry's caught in a conundrum about whether to make those medicines available in those countries, and it's hard to walk away from it and walk away from the patients, and so it's just a fact. And increasingly, many folks in the U.S. are saying that our own government is paying less and less. We see this in the Medicaid program and in the 340B program and in the rapid growth that they've had as well. So all in all, given these structural changes, the manufacturers have been forced to raise list prices over time, and they have done quite substantially, as we're all aware. And I would add that generally, we, as an industry, we've done a pretty poor job of explaining that to the different stakeholders. And for folks outside the industry, it has felt, in fact, a bit abusive. It has felt like the industry has raised prices simply because they can and not because they've needed to. So next slide, please. So this has triggered a response. Can we have the next slide, please? There we go. So given that, this is, of course, has triggered a response from the payers, and that has come in the form of increasing drug management over time. The payers are increasingly using formulary exclusions. They're bidding competitive medicines against one another for limited spots on their formularies. They do that to obviously extract discounts and rebates. It's been very effective, and the number of exclusions has been going up every year. In addition to that, we also have extensive utilization management these days. Nearly all new medicines are prior authorized today. Many have non-medical step edits as well for financial reasons. And those things are ubiquitous, and the industry really just needs to plan for them in our drug development plans. Additionally, on the patient side, we've seen increasing patient cost sharing. This comes both in the form of higher deductibles, particularly people enrolled in high deductible health plans, as well as co-insurance for high-cost medicines that are placed in a specialty tier. And as a result of all this, fill rates have been going down. And if you look in the bottom right quadrant here, you see for new medicines launched and then measured at month 12 of the percentage of prescriptions written that are actually being filled. And you can see now that the figure has dropped below a third of prescriptions being filled for new medicines on market at month 12. That's a very substantial change. It has a big implication in terms of shifting launch uptake curves, obviously down and to the right, and is a challenge for the industry as well as a challenge for the patients that we're trying to serve as well. All right, let's have the next slide. The pricing impact of this on the industry has been quite substantial. As a result, the rebates have gone up substantially. Net price trends are actually negative and have been for the last several years. And drug spending overall in the U.S. has flattened over the last several years. We see a more than doubling in rebates from 2012. The current figure from Adam Fine for 2021 that he calculates is now a bit over $200 billion. And we talked earlier about increases in list price changes. You can see that those have begun to moderate as the debate about drug pricing has heated up. But you can see also that net price growth has been substantially lower all along and has actually been negative since mid-2017. And taken together, those trends along with increasing genericization and changes in mix, we see that overall drug spending has flattened. So a big pricing headwind, I would say, for the industry in the U.S. Next slide. Now, there are implications for patients as well. They have to they bear the burden of trying to navigate all the intense utilization management and the increasing cost shares. And we see here some of the impact of this. We see the increase in average out-of-pocket spending by patients over time growing quite substantially, and how that leads to increasing abandonment as well. And as I mentioned earlier, initial fill rates for new medicines are down to less than a third, even for established medicines on the market, well established on the market after several years with good market access, good coverage. Those numbers can range from 60 to 90% initial fill rates going through. And then, of course, on the far right, we see the impact on adherence, which is also quite substantial as well. So we're in a situation where for patients, even for established medicines, 10, 20, 30% of the time, they're unable to get their initial prescription filled. And then for those that do get them filled, half or more generally fall off therapy within 12 months. And this is not only a burden for the patients, obviously, but then also in return for the industry in terms of a volume headwind. So the industry now is facing both a pricing headwind as well as a volume headwind in the U.S. Okay, next slide, please. And while this has been going on, the traditional promotional levers have been demonstrating declining effectiveness and efficiency as well. And in fact, a very significant shift to digital promotion has begun. And this isn't because of declining spending. In fact, spending on marketing and advertising to physicians has been going up quite substantially over time. But as I mentioned, the effectiveness has been going down. The number of doctors, the doctors are busy these days themselves. They're working hard to see more patients and to navigate the managed care administrative hurdles as well. And consequently, many of them have less time for the sales reps and are difficult to see. And so access for the reps has been going down for quite some time and is reaching more acute levels. And along with it, the return on the rep visits has declined. And not only for the rep visits as well, but even in advertising with all the hyper-concentration of the markets, really, and the competition, the advertising has gotten crowded and more expensive as well. And the return on advertising has gone down as well, the other big lever for the industry. At the same time, physicians are showing changes in their preferences for how they want to receive information and moreover, even what they want overall from the pharmaceutical industry. We see, again, the declining preference related to MSLs and reps in the field and other sources that they use, and importantly, the growth of the internet and digital channels as well. And so not only are the preferences changing for how they want to receive the information, but actually what they want from the industry is changing as well. If you look at that over time, the value of education about disease state and therapeutic is going down over time. And what has risen to the top now is actually what physicians think of as customer service in first place. So get me exactly what I need when I want it. So if it's just a narrow question a narrow answer to a very specific question, get me that from someone who really knows it and in a way that I can access it easily when I want it. Or if it's a sample, then, just get me that and I don't need the rest. And then beneath that, customer service, the second thing that they actually prize the most is patient service. So I'm having a difficult time navigating all these challenges. My patients are having a difficult time. They need help understanding their insurance. They need help being sure that they're on a formulary agent, that they're optimizing their coverage, and they can get through the prior authorizations as well. So access is going down. The channels that physicians prefer are changing, and actually what they want from the industry is changing over time as well. And what's emerging, obviously, as we all would expect and understand, is a growing emphasis on digital promotion. The physicians are looking for more efficient use of their time and other channels, as we mentioned, to access the information how they want, when they want. And the industry is trying to meet them where they are and also seeing if they can create some better effectiveness and better efficiency through these channels. All right, let's look at the next slide. So if you step back and think about this, there's some substantial implications that really matter for the industry. And the implications here are driven by the U.S. market, but I think really impact the global performance of small or medium and large-sized biotech and pharma companies today. And the first is just the importance of really having excellence in the core functions. I'll say core commercial functions, but it really goes beyond that, and we'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. But obviously, these are do now things. It is beyond time to have the very best market access teams and functions that you can have. The role of patient services has gotten more and more important over time. And many companies now are investing in that much more and reinventing how they go about it. As we just saw, the sales environment is changing, the marketing environment is changing, adapting to those things, adapting to them so that you can really remain at the forefront of the industry in these domains has never been more important. Next, there are implications for drug development as well. And it's become increasingly important to think about in the registrational trials, the selection criteria and the endpoints in a very clear-headed way. The selection criteria will drive the prior authorization. Nearly every new medicine these days has got a prior authorization. So just anticipate that and plan for it and set up your study in a way that the selection criteria make it relatively easier to identify the patients that are going to benefit from the medicine and relatively easier to serve as a call to action for the physicians to prescribe the medicine. And then the endpoints matter as well. We're all familiar with the traditional safety and efficacy endpoints that the FDA uses for registration, but increasingly, obviously, endpoints that demonstrate the value of the medicine are important in the marketplace as well. A good example for this, I would say, in my recent career from Novartis was Entresto. Entresto is a really remarkable heart failure medicine. It's indicated for patients with symptomatic heart failure with reduced ejection fraction to reduce their likelihood of hospitalization and death. One would think that alone would be a call to action, but it turns out that managing heart failure patients is quite complicated. These patients often have many other conditions in addition to their heart failure and are taking numerous medicines. Physicians are quite careful and thoughtful about changing the regimes that they're on, and generally wait until a hospitalization for heart failure occurs to make a change in their medicine regime. And so, I think in retrospect, if we had anticipated that and built that into the selection criteria, if your patient is hospitalized for heart failure and has reduced ejection fraction, then enroll that patient in the trial, and then you get an outcome, and that informs then the guidelines and becomes the call to action, and so that it becomes very clear. I don't have to hem and haw in the office about whether I should add a ninth medicine or change, one medicine to another on somebody that's taking 8 or 9 or 10 medicines. I have a very clear event. It's very clear that I'm motivated to treat the patient then, and the patient's motivated as well. And then likewise, after the launch of the medicine, we did some great work demonstrating the value of the medicine. If that information had all been available at launch, I think it could have facilitated the uptake in managed care and lowered the barriers of access for both the practices as well as the patients. So in drug development, selection criteria and endpoints matter. Begin with the end in mind. Next, asset valuations. Those are impacted obviously very substantially by all these things. And the main driver here is that the importance of the portfolio. Companies that have more than one agent in a therapeutic area can create better value propositions for PBMs and payers, and ought to take that into consideration when they're thinking about which medicines to invest in and develop, and ultimately commercialize. I have seen business development analyses of agents that on a standalone basis had a net present value for the remaining branded lifetime of that agent of $5 billion, nested inside one company's portfolio due to synergies, not just on the sales and marketing, which we're all familiar with, but actually more increasingly importantly on the pricing and access side of it as well. Changed the net present value calculation quite substantially to $7 billion, a 40% increase, and then modeled within the portfolio of another company that had an even stronger portfolio in this disease state. The net present value became $12 billion. So it more than doubled the lifetime value of the medicine. So these are very important drivers of success, commercial success in the U.S. now, and ought to be taken into consideration by all R&D teams and BD&L teams when they're doing asset valuations. Next, I think there's emerged a very important distinction between medicines and products. We've had the luxury for years in our industry that just about any good medicine we could figure out how to commercialize and turn it into a good product, a good business. That is clearly no longer the case. There are some molecules that, in fact, are good medicines for patients and can be advances actually in the standard of care, but they just don't translate into a great product and a great business. We've seen that in some of the MS products that have launched. We've seen that in increasingly actually in cardiovascular disease as well. Again, an example from Novartis, canakinumab, an agent that is an anti-inflammatory mechanism of action, was demonstrated in a large 5-year, 10,000 patient phase 3 trial to substantially improve patient outcomes. But we could not figure out a combination of price and resulting access in the market and promotional levels that hung together in a way that would turn that into a successful product in the market. And we worked with the FDA to try to change the label in some ways that would actually narrow the focus of the medicine just to the patients that got the most benefit. We were unsuccessful in doing that and were unable to commercialize the medicine. So really important implications here that for pharmaceutical companies today to be the best they can, anticipate all these things and plan for them, manage their portfolios thoughtfully, and focus really on medicines that bring significant incremental value. Now, all that said, the system that we have is, I believe, now interfering with both good signals to the industry about drug development, as well as good access for patients for the medicines that they need. And I think that we need to reform the system in a way that instead of encouraging higher and higher list prices with deep, oftentimes hidden rebates that don't get back to the patients, and then intense utilization management, so a system that actually favors high prices and low access, we need to flip that on its head and turn it into a system that incentivizes companies to charge more, show moderation in their prices, and then when you get a good fair price, gives patients great access to those medicines. So last slide, please. We call this value-based pricing and access, or you could think of fair prices for fair access. And the notion here would be manufacturers, instead of contracting with PBMs and payers for size and control, we've done that for years, and we have selected now for a payer environment that is massively consolidated and exhibiting very aggressive high control, and instead offering what we think of as value-based prices. These are prices that would be in alignment with health technology assessment benchmarks that the manufacturers themselves calculate. The PBM could calculate as well. And ICER, of course, is another organization that does that here in the U.S., and there are a number of them. But if a price in those ranges could be agreed upon and considered a fair price, then in exchange, the payers would offer what we think of as fair access with a rapid formulary review, a simple physician attestation kind of prior authorization, or sometimes even no prior authorization, no non-medical step edits, that is, no step edits behind drugs that don't offer these kinds of prices, and then fixed modest copays for the patients as well. It's getting late in the game, I think, for the industry in terms of the evolution of the market in the U.S., and the time to make a change like this, if we're going to be able to do it, I believe is now. So I'll stop there and welcome Jack back in to see if there are any questions.
Thanks, Scott. That was great. Yeah, let's get into a couple questions, and I'll just start off where you ended, kind of to extend it. What do you see as the main hurdles and potential timelines for something along the value-based lines that you were talking about?
Yeah. So since leaving Novartis, I have continued to work on this notion, and I'm actually working with a company that's trying to implement it now, a value-based formulary, if you will. On the payer and the payer customer side, the biggest challenge, as you might imagine, is their commitment to the current environment and specifically the rebates, as you know, Jack, and their their worry that if they open access, that we'll get inappropriate utilization of medicines. Now, I think, things have changed a lot since the primary care markets in the 90s and early 2000s. I fundamentally, I don't believe there are MS patients out there taking MS medicines just because, and they're seeing subspecialists, as you know, and doctors are only prescribing those medicines for patients that they think will really benefit from them. So anyway, there's addiction to the rebate and there's fear as well on the utilization side. And then actually for the manufacturers, it's been a bit of a surprise to me, but we're also addicted to the current system in our own ways as well. I mentioned the contracting for size and control. That attitude is quite prevalent in the industry, and the notion that, hey, if I'm going to give up some rebates here, I want to emerge with a competitive advantage at the formulary level, and so seeing through that to an opportunity really to not pay for knocking out the competition, but rather pay for the best access I can get for my medicine has been a challenge on the manufacturer side. I think the big PBMs are highly consolidated now. They control 80% of the market. That's been growing over time. I think if we can't change the direction soon, then we're going to be dug into that system and unable to change shortly. And I think if you look forward from that, I think really the next step for the industry will be additional government intervention in pricing, and not just for Medicare and Medicaid and other government programs, including, as we've recently seen, but eventually for the commercial markets as well.
Yeah, well, let's talk a little bit more about that part of it, Scott. The recent passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, which has specific provisions for pharma in a lot of different places, including pricing. How do you see that changing this landscape that you've taken us through?
Mm-hmm. Well, a couple things come to mind, at a smaller level, I'll say there are some improvements for access for Medicare patients there. There are a cap in the total out-of-pocket outlay for patients, as well as actually a bit of an expansion of the low-income subsidies for patients with financial need. And so those things, I think, together will be good. But at a more macro level, it signals, I think, obviously a willingness of the government to intervene in drug pricing mechanisms in the U.S. And I think the industry needs to understand that we're not immune from those possibilities, not only for the government programs, but I think increasingly for the future for potentially for commercial programs as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Scott. This has really been great. Really appreciate it. Looking forward to continuing the discussion individually and more broadly as we go forward. A great session. Thank you.
Thanks, Jack. It's been my pleasure to be with you.